for today's meeting. So here's kind of like what I'd like to try and do in terms of the meeting. We always get a good turnout when somebody like John Ciovacco is going to give us his updates and his travels and new information. But what I'd like to do is for people that are first timers to this every other Friday call, give you a chance to introduce yourselves. Then I'm going to turn it over to Christine Hoffer, our executive director, for any announcements. And then we're going to jump into John Ciovacco and the number of things that we've publicized he's going to talk about. Just to not put the new folks on, at a disadvantage, as we go through the meeting and as people speak, I'm going to ask them to identify who they are and what organization they're with, et cetera, et cetera. So can I get the first timer folks just to jump in, come off any mute and tell us who you are?
Hi, I'm Steve Streichman. I'm with the Capital Region Land Bank, trying to work on a bunch of geothermal projects. Prior to that, I was a commissioner of planning in Troy, where we were working on a U10 district geothermal, and I'm not sure the status of that now that I'm gone.
Okay, I think we got a guy that might be able to comment on that today. Next? Who's next?
I'll go next. I'm James Grieve. I'm a co-founder of My Career Power, and we're a thermal energy storage innovator, and we see great synergies with geothermal applications for that.
Terrific. Glad you could join us. Anyone else?
Can we ask questions? Let
me do one. Yes, Bob. The answer to that is yes. We'll sneak you in before Christine. Mr. Reiner, thanks for joining us. Been a long time no see.
Yes, hello. Great to see and hear you all. I'm alive and well.
Good. Okay. Feel free to participate. And that's the kind of the general rule here, folks. We will probably use the hand signal today, but if that doesn't work and I don't see it, we still want to hear from you. Everybody's view is important, so just jump in. Okay, Bob, quick to you and then to Christine.
I'm just curious about the land bank. Is the land bank restricted to ownership of surface assets, or can the land bank own easements and underground real property, like, for instance, ground loops?
I believe we could own, we don't have to just own surface property. It's really not outlined in our statute, but from every discussion I've had, we could own one.
And that would include an ownership interest in easement, which is interest in real property as well?
I'm actually, so the reason I'm looking at this is to find ways to work with developers who are on privately owned properties. Not that I would necessarily own anything in that. It's a possibility, but I'm looking more for information to help them be able to use geothermal systems instead of traditional methods. So that's why I'm on here.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Great. Okay, Bob, you need to identify who you are for the new folks.
I'm just Bob. I'm unaffiliated.
He's Bob Lyman. Come on.
You're not.
No, I mean, come on. I don't. I'm a member of NY-GEO. I don't have any affiliations.
Yeah, it's not Robert.
Okay. For those folks that don't know Bob, he is very important to New York Geo. He's a fantastic volunteer, been on many rate cases, helping us develop strategies and understand what's going on. Today's feat for Bob was to be a major player in the depreciation discussions for the future of gas pipes in New York State. So, Bob, you're way too shy. Okay, Naomi, we aren't going to miss you, so go ahead. Thanks for putting your name in the chat.
Hi, Naomi Weiss. I work for ICF and I'm supporting the Con Ed Clean Heat team.
Terrific. Thank you. Glad to have you. Okay, we'll catch up to anybody that we've missed. But I want to turn it over to Christine, our executive director, for any announcements.
Just like to say thanks for everybody for joining us on a Friday. A quick reminder that we do have the NY-GEO 2024 Albany conference coming up April 8th and 9th. Registration is open. I'll put the link in chat. We do have a schedule of a glance that we did put up. Just to give you an idea of what John is working on now. This will probably change a bit, but it'll give you a good idea of what we have planned for our sessions on the 9th. I'm very excited to say that we sold out of exhibit space today, sold the last remaining piece. We are looking to add additional space within the exhibit hall for any folks that are interested and has not secured space. I saw that Randy joined. So thank you to CoreChem, who's a sponsor of the conference. And thanking all of our sponsors. They're listed here on the website. So lots of folks contributing to the success of NY-GEO as well as our conference. So again, I'll put the link in chat. And if you have any questions, you can send me a chat or an email about the conference itself.
Thanks, Christine. Well, once every month, we try to bring our board members on who have busy schedules and can't make every other Friday. Bill Nowak is very consistent, and we appreciate that. This month, we've got John Ciovacco with 3 or 4 things he's going to talk about. Samara Swanston wasn't able to make it, unfortunately. John is just about everywhere with the geothermal world that I can tell. I never know what part of the country he's in, looking at new facilities or consulting with utilities. He's supposed to be based in the Albany area, but I don't know. He's in New England now, and then Georgia. He's on the West Coast. So he brings a lot of information to us. He makes it very easy for me on these sessions. So John, how about taking it away?
All right. Bob, you got to ask your question. Is that correct? It was about to Steve, right?
Yeah, I just was curious if they, you know, the angle. I'm trying to see if this is another way to get a third-party ownership.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'll share my screen. So I give I run a couple of projects that are sort of in feasibility and moving towards engineering in the Albany area for thermal energy networks. And part of that I do is I update the folks on my team and the city of Albany folks and others that jump on about what's going on. And I just figured, since it was time for me to do this, I just share some of the kinds of things that I share with them. And certainly this group thinks more broadly than my little project team does. So where I tell them things that they haven't really given much thought to, but I expect this to be more of an interaction where people have their own thoughts about these things besides just hearing from me. I do like to travel around and try to look at cool geothermal things. So I was in Georgia recently, so I want to talk about Trilith, which is a geothermal community that's down in Forsyth, Georgia. All right, share my screen. I'm in Zoom, right? And I'm allowed to do it. That's a strong start. I select the proper screen and I share. I want to start out with the comments that Aztec, but mostly the Geo Exchange and others put in about the Treasury guidance that came out in November, and then comments were due by the like January 20th timeframe. And some of those comments were around third-party ownership and really the risk to third-party ownership by separately owned properties. They gave an example that really kind of killed or would kill if it stands third-party ownership. There's also some comments about an 80-20 rule where 80% of any installation that would qualify as an energy property that you could take a tax credit on would need to be new. And so things like changing out heat pumps or expanding the thermal energy network where you're just adding on, you might not have 80% new, but it should still count. So those are things that folks commented on. There was another area that there's been some debate as to whether we should comment on. Domestic hot water is not, clearly in the statute. If you look at the laws, even back from 2008, when a lot of this stuff first started, it's really just about space heating and space cooling when it comes to a geothermal heat pump property. But domestic hot water is commonly, and more commonly now, a component. And so a lot of folks that have been in the industry for a long time have been taking domestic hot water components and the expenses related to those as part of a larger geothermal project, like a multifamily building with central domestic hot water, is including those expenses as a part of a tax credit. But since it's not specifically in there, different parties think we should test the waters with Treasury and see if we can get them to clarify that that would be permitted. There's also more about hybrid structures in this guidance as well. And hybrid generally meaning things like what percentage of the energy comes from a geothermal source. 75% has been a number that the industry's kind of used and had some basis for. They brought it down to 50%. So that means that only 50% of the thermal energy resource needs to come from a geothermal source, and it would still be eligible, which is good. But then there's a prorating between 50 and 100% that we're trying to get them to basically say, as long as you get over that 50% threshold, 100% of the expenses should count rather than prorating the expenses. Some of you know a lot about what I just talked about, maybe more than I do. And some of you that might be all new information about, but I just want to mostly, I'm interested in some dialogue around this, but it's a big topic and can be endless. But I did want to share, and I'm happy to share with everyone. They're all public documents. The Geo Exchange comments are here, and they really just touched on two topics. The main topic was around the separately owned properties. And so, there's an example in the Treasury guidance that's kind of killer, that basically says that, if X and Y own separate components, let me see if this is an example to illustrate the scenario. This might be the one that is to solve it. One's a coil and then, yeah. So this is the example that's used in the Treasury guidance that kind of like put a stake through a lot of our hearts. Hang on, I'll get the zoom right. Give me 1 second. Now, if X and Y own separate components of a geothermal heat pump equipment, which are taken is a unit of energy property. If X owns the coils in the ground and Y owns the heat pump, no Section 48 credit may be determined with respect to either X or Y, because each owns a separate component of the energy property and does not constitute a unit of an energy property as defined in section blah, blah, blah. So again, lots of folks here are familiar with this. What the Geo Exchange does is basically says, okay, you put that out there as guidance. We don't like it. We think it's really going to hurt the industry. The industry is at a point of growth. They give examples of legislative intent. So they basically kind of quote from legislators that basically wanted the extension of the Section 48 credit and the elaboration of the Section 48 credit to a higher percentage. A lot of that was to create a third-party ownership market, and so there's examples of that. So they go through some of those. Then the 80-20 test is the other thing that the Geo Exchange focused on, and again, that would help promote the replacement of geothermal heat pump equipment in an existing building or an extension of a building or the extension of a network where 80%, you couldn't meet that 80% of the energy property is new because you're just replacing one heat pump in a high school building and they've got 200 heat pumps in the ground loop. So you're definitely not a new, a lot of it is existing equipment that you're dependent on. So they make comments about how that's not helpful, essentially. I did want to make notice that National Grid and other utilities, just this is an example, and other utilities put in comments mostly related to the Geo Exchange comments, focusing on those two issues. Did Con Ed put in comments? I think there's some Con Ed people here.
Yes, they did.
Okay. Yeah, I thought they did. A little bit of a breakout group of us expanded the comments a little to include clarity on recovered heat. It would qualify. So there's certain aspects of the way that that geothermal heat pump equipment is interpreted that might discourage people from doing internal heat recovery. So you might have a relatively small ground loop is because you figured out how to share energy within a building or from other buildings, and then you end up disqualifying it because you don't meet that even 50% threshold. So there were some comments that we generated around that. We also, the interdependent, the extent of the interdependence test, just there was still some, they put in this thing about functional interdependence that basically an expense could be used in the basis for a tax credit if it was shown to be functionally interdependent, that you really needed that component to make the energy property work. So that's good, but a number of us were a little unclear about the extent of that. So we asked questions about that. And then the final thing was around the clarity around the 1 megawatt exception. The functional interdependence, we also threw in some licks around domestic hot water. I'm not going to go through the comments in detail. I'm happy to provide them to everyone, give examples, but we're really trying to figure out how to get, we might only get, a few more bites at this apple and then have to live with it for 10 years. So we're really trying to clarify some things. The Geo Exchange was reluctant to try to clarify some of these extended issues here because they just felt like statute doesn't necessarily tell you some of these things. And so why don't ask Treasury to do something that really should be changed by law? All of that might be fine. There's a number of us that feel like getting clarity on something is better than being unclear because uncertainty kills deals. That's again, I don't want to go into tremendous detail about all this, but I just want to let folks know a lot of comments went in. I would say a record amount of comments from the geothermal heat pump industry went into this response to this Treasury guidance document that came out. It's really only about commercial. It's section 48, so it's the commercial tax credit. So these comments don't necessarily relate to the 25C or the residential tax credit for smaller buildings, but a big effort was made by lots of stakeholders and was very impressive, I think. I guess I'd pause there. If folks have comments or questions.
Hey, John, can I just point out the importance of commenting is very much seen in the base, in the document that has been commented on, because in that document, it points out that nobody from the geothermal industry had responded to a request for comments in 2015.
Right.
Okay, 8 years ago.
Right.
And as a result, they were potentially saying silly things in their proposal, but it was because nobody from the industry had commented 8 years ago. And the impact of those comments, the comments that people might have put in 2015 would have had their impact on the document that we are responding to today. Okay. Similarly, okay, we've made a lot of comments on this proposal. We don't know if or when this proposal, that they made will ever be accepted, but the comments are there and in the record and will apply to every other rule that they consider making in the future. So, it's always important to get the comments in, because those comments, the absence of comments can bite you like as much as a decade later, as they did in this case, because the industry didn't respond in 2015.
And you did quantify that in your thing in the chat there. So why don't you mention that?
Oh, well, I point out in the chat that there are a total of 295 comments. 102 of them mentioned geothermal. I think 87 of them had the phrase heat pump in them. A lot of them are basically, they're almost like form letter submissions based on the on the Geo Exchange base letter. But there were a lot of people that came in, you know, like Aztec, National Grid, Con Ed.
Yeah,
a lot of
NY-GEO.
other people with NY-GEO.
Dean got comments in.
Yeah, I actually put in a comment. Thank you for totally ignoring my contribution there.
I ignored NY-GEO. You're in good company.
Okay, great. There were a lot of people that put in comments that were actually substantive. The tax savers, they came in
Yep. And they
supporting
had
us.
some very unique ones. They were good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
usually the tax saver guys they're all about 179, 179D. They don't do much on 48, but this time they came in very much contributing to our interests. And this is great because now this begins to establish the record that will influence all future regulations made by the IRS, and it gives us a foundation that we can build on in the future.
Yeah, good. Others that are less close to this have any thoughts or questions? Let's see. Great. I did want to mention that Geothermal Rising is a group that has been more around hot rocks geothermal, so generation of electricity, maybe some direct use of hotter, deeper resources, but mostly generation of electricity, and has gotten a lot of attention from the DOE and has increasingly animated conferences that cover a big range of geothermal topics, and they've started to try to get to see geothermal on a continuum and to try to get ground source heat pumps and low temperature geothermal to be, you know, a part of what they're doing and promoting. And there's been mixed feelings about that. I think the Geothermal Rising folks know it, and certainly the IXPA, BRASS, and the Geo Exchange folks. There's a little question within, you know, sort of all those ranks as to sort of how the two groups might work together or not duplicate or not add confusion when advocating. They happen to be running a conference just on thermal energy networks in Rochester, Minnesota, coming up in March. And so just to learn more about that group and sort of what they're doing, I decided to help them out with that conference. And so that's coming up. And that's going to be a little more emphasis on municipal ownership of thermal energy networks. So a little less on the utility side, but the utilities aren't excluded from it. But Rochester, Minnesota in particular is looking to do a municipal system. And they're the ones that are kind of, you know, gathering the resources or being the hub or the host for this. You know, and this is from my Albany projects meeting. So, you know, Albany's, you know, thinking they might send somebody, but it's an interesting group. And I guess I just wanted to just let people know that was happening. I do know a lot about, which I don't think much of it is posted. We pretty much have the program set, but I don't think it's posted just yet. But it's a little ways off, but just let folks know that there's another group out there called Geothermal Rising, and we're trying the IXPA, Geo Exchange, NY-GEO. We're trying to figure out sort of how that group fits in our lives, and so I'm jumping out there to take a look at that and participate in their conference.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
Egg is on the board there.
Indeed. Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Jay's been the main interface, you know, kind of between the two worlds. And Jay is on the committee to put the program together, and I chat with Jay regularly as a result of that.
He invited us to come, but I'm certainly not going to be able to make that.
Yeah. Yeah, if people have an interest, I do think it'll be a good program. It's over 3 days. It starts like on noon on like a Tuesday, all day Wednesday, and then half a day on Thursday. As I recall, I think that's what the 12th through 14th is. So it is stretched out a bit. But I think it'll be good. I always go in there with trying to be, I'm going to learn something. If I go in there thinking I won't learn something, I can probably make that a self-fulfilling prophecy, but I'm not going to do that. What else did I have? Oh, I want to talk about Trilith. Trilith is well, I guess I would just tell people, just a note. Habitat for Humanity in Albany is doing 10 homes in a row on a Orange Street in Albany. And I'm working with the Affordable Housing Partnership to make them geothermal and potentially have them connect to a future network. But we don't want them to necessarily go air source. They have funding for that. That's what they're going to do. So we took the air source number and we got some additional funding that was available, actually was originally allocated for solar on individual rooftops in that neighborhood, and it was repurposed to pay for the ground loop instead of a PV solar array, since decarbonization seemed like a higher goal, and also it would permanently lower the bills for those folks that live there, as opposed to an air source system, which would likely be a higher bill than the natural gas equivalent that you might have. So that's kind of fun, and we're looking at using the Family Dans is a HVAC contractor in Albany, and we're looking to have them do the installs. They don't do geothermal as a rule, but we're setting it up so that we try to keep the workforce that's already there and just repurpose them into installing and servicing systems like this. So they're likely going to be individual boreholes per house along there. But we're going to think about how we could get it so that we could network them together at some point. There's a little bit of trouble in the short time frame that we had just to get all the easements straightened out if we want to connect them first thing. And then there's central pumping, and we just don't have enough infrastructure set up yet. But just having them go geothermal will be at least a strong start, and they could be a good contributor to a future network. Trilith is it's Forsyth, Georgia, is maybe 40 minutes south of Atlanta kind of area. They have a Marvel. It's called a new urbanist community. They consider themselves the largest geothermal community. I'm not sure they really have numbers to back that up, but it's a cool community. They're eclectic, different styles of new homes. It's all new home development, and they have tiny houses, expensive tiny houses, mind you, and they've got ones that are 11,000 square feet. They've got a big range. And the Trilith Studios is sponsors or has a lot of the Marvel movies are made down in that area. And the community, actually 25% of the community that owns and built these houses works for the studio, and the other 75% come from all over. So every house is geothermal. They made that a rule when they started 5 years ago, and they like it. They've had some real good success with it. And I want to show you some pictures of when I was there. The interesting thing about this, aside from it's all geothermal, they're individual boreholes per home. They're different numbers, size of boreholes. Mostly it's one borehole per home. A few of them require more energy than that. They literally use 180 feet per ton, so it's air conditioning. And they did 200 feet per ton for the first couple of years, but they just found their building envelopes and everything were such that that seems excessive. So they went to 180 feet per ton and have had good luck with that. Allied Drilling was down there drilling for them when I was there, putting in boreholes. They put in boreholes in advance of the homes being built. Let me show you. And then they screen. So here's some of the houses.
Do they use the pond?
They don't, they drill. They have an individual borehole that's on the person's property. And they give people the option. They literally give them the option. You can own your geothermal system all yourself and your borehole, and you can take your tax credit on the expenses for that. Or we can install the borehole at our expense, and they put a charge on the homeowners association fee. And 60% of the homeowners choose to put the geothermal borehole as a monthly charge on their homeowners association. And again, they've been doing this for the last 5 years, and they have another, hundreds of, I think there are 350 homes, and I think they're going to have 550 or something like that. They do about something like 70 homes a year. This picture was from their website. This picture I took when I was driving around with the guy. That's actually by definition a tiny home. But the bricks are reclaimed bricks from construction and stuff. It's an expensive home. And it's Allied. It's down there. Our old friends Allied. They're everywhere, and they were putting in 450 foot, I believe. This is from top of one of the buildings looking down. The boreholes are here, 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 and here. They drill those in advance of the foundation work. They just locate them reasonably precisely, and then the mechanical room is right here. So they just have a very short run to come in. Not unusual for this kind of project, but just kind of interesting. They also do something that a lot of new construction I see doesn't do. They zone, which is nice. So this is a zone control panel, and it's a lot of flex duct. It's not the highest level, but most of them are short runs. It works out. Enertech is the main machine that they use. They decided to put them on hangers from beams above for vibration isolation. So this is actually just a pan below, but it's suspended, and that's common in commercial construction. You might hang a heat pump like that and put vibration isolating little pads there. They also have no antifreeze, and they don't seem to do any water treatment at all. They make sure it's reasonable water, but they pretty much just go for it after that. And this heat pump is on a single ground loop that's affiliated with this house. They do have some either leaks or pressure changes. All of them have a water refill capability, so they can open this valve and put water in, and they also can take water out. So they're some of it wasn't necessarily ideal in my mind, but they're getting it done and they like it. And I just think it's interesting that they give the home, they're not looking to do energy as a service to make money, so they make it really quite affordable. I think the charges are commonly things like $20 a month, and a lot of people say, why wouldn't I just pay $20 a month rather than have another $10,000 or $12,000 dollars on my mortgage? So I thought people might be interested in that. Whisper Valley is the other one, which I guess I visited recently too. And Whisper Valley has a borehole per house. The boreholes are designed for heating in Austin, Texas area. And so they're short looped for air conditioning. So they're typically 350 feet per house. They're more common size houses at Whisper Valley, and they then have all the boreholes at everyone's individual house linked to a central cooling tower. And so when the air conditioning season is in earnest and the boreholes get above a certain temperature, I think it might be 80 or 85, they turn on the cooling tower to modulate or cool down everybody's boreholes during the air conditioning season. I would argue that maybe deeper boreholes would be your friend and not have the complication of that central system, but it's working for them. And that is an energy as a service model that is run by a company called EcoSmart Energy which was created for that. But it's Taurus real estate group. The Boston area is actually the fund behind it.
Hey, John, JR here. Just a time check. We've got about 17 minutes left, and then I see Jackie's hand up and then Bob's. You want to take those now?
I'm good. Yeah. I don't. Did I
Okay.
have other things I was supposed to talk about? I'm just sort of rattling, stuff off that I'm doing.
Anything you say will be interesting, but go ahead, Jackie.
The project with the homeowners association option, that's the Georgia project you said?
Trilith, yeah.
And is that I mean, I guess it doesn't really matter where in Georgia. So as far as adding makeup water, I know the general standards are to not have any leaks, but as I understand it, the biggest downside to small leaks, if you have, is diluting the antifreeze over time. Do you know of any specific problems that would arise in a loop without antifreeze if there's just this little leak that they slowly make up? I mean, I know you can have some corrosion.
Yeah, it's the right. Yeah, I talked to him directly about that, and I said, well, it's going to dilute your antifreeze or even your mechanical water, like if you have treatment in it. And he said, you don't really. I don't. He goes, I don't think we treat, and we definitely don't have antifreeze. So I was like, okay, yeah. So I'm with you there.
It's kind of just. I mean, if there are any problems, I guess they'll find out. Is that? Have you heard of anybody just knocking them up like that when they don't have antifreeze? I really haven't, other than maybe a commercial job, but not residential.
No, it was. I think they had some trouble with leaks early. He said the biggest trouble that they've had with geothermal is drillers, and just trying to get drillers to be reliable, to price in any way that makes sense to them, and to do a quality job. So they have a little bit of mistrust that the ground loop will get. They've had some problems with leaks, and then they just put it in as a standard to have that refill, and whether they need it or not. And again, they don't have that dilution issue. They also went from 5 mechanical contractors, because each builder, because there's different builders, to only allowing 2 mechanical contractors, because the quality range was too high, and they basically forced all the builders to use 1 of 2 mechanical contractors going forward. Just a note.
Thank you.
Yep. Somebody else's hand.
Yeah, John, I'm curious about Trilith. Of course, if the tax credits would only be available to the first homeowner, right? Not in resale, because you only get them when you install the stuff. So if the first guy that occupies the structure chooses to go with the HOA, it's pretty much probably locked in as an HOA property for the rest of all time, unless law changes or something. I'm curious, in that case, does the HOA have any mechanism by which it can monetize the tax credits? And I guess a secondary question is whether or not they think there is such a mechanism today. Acceptance of the IRS proposal that we were commenting on would block that, correct?
Correct. They have never taken a Section 48. Dan Cathy is the retired Chick-fil-A CEO. He's the funding source for it. Very rich guy, and
he's religiously motivated or whatever.
Yeah, he actually was. I don't know that much about Dan Cathy, but he was he basically said he's not as bad a guy as you think. And I said, I don't really have an opinion about him. But anyway, I said, depending on how this separately owned properties thing goes, your expenses related to those ground loops, you could probably take a pretty sizable tax credit on. Why aren't you doing that? And he said, I don't know, it was 10%. We just didn't think it was worth it. And now we just, talking to you, I'm interested in learning more, so they did it because they wanted no outdoor condensers. They wanted a quiet community. They want to differentiate themselves from other communities, and they weren't, again, they didn't come at it from kind of an energy as a service, or necessarily that it was, they just haven't really optimized the way to monetize the tax credit.
Okay, but anyway, if our comments on the IRS proposal are not accepted, it will not be possible for an organization like them to take the credits,
Right.
if they only own the ground loops, right? Yeah.
Right. Right.
I'm going to jump in here. Jackie, I'm going to back up a little bit for the newcomers. Would you introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. I primarily do design work for geothermal, both forced air and radiant, and I work with either contractors who would like to get into geothermal but are not familiar with it, and would like to have an experienced hand to make sure they're not messing things up, or DIY homeowners. Surprisingly enough, I've been doing it about 20 years, and DIY homeowners often puts a chill down people's spines, contractors' spines, but especially there's a DIY motivation in the United States. There's a lot of people that are handy enough that they can install horizontal loop systems almost entirely themselves. Maybe they hire an electrician, and so on and so forth. And that's I've been doing it successfully. I started in the family business about 20 years ago, and I've taken over the business myself. Don't seem to have any problems. We don't let people use methanol or do, anything really dangerous themselves, but it covers a niche that otherwise a lot of these people wouldn't be able to have a geothermal because either they don't have a contractor near them or the pricing is just too high to pay back.
Thank you. Very good. Sorry, John. But
I think I committed to talking about the Steamboat Square project a little bit too, so I'm happy to do a little bit of that. Let me share my screen again quickly, and then I'm just going to flip through some images as I just give you the thumbnail on what it is, and then happy to address questions as time allows. Share again.
Got about 10 minutes left, John.
Indeed. Share. So Steamboat Square is a collection of buildings in Albany. There's 4 12-story towers, one pictured here. And there are some townhouses as well that are 2-story. So there's 3 of these larger buildings. And then and you'll see as I just sort of flip through quickly here, this was like an early site walk that I had. They have a lot of the buildings were unoccupied. A lot of the units that like have a dead wing, like almost all 12 stories had no one in them. So they're renovating all of them over the next bunch of years, and they started with one of them, and that project is now commissioning. And I have some pictures of that as well, but they're going to do all of them. So all these towers are going to be done, and then also, which I should have some pictures of, the townhomes, which are 2-story buildings. This is from the rooftop. This is actually the test bore that we did. Test bore way down there. Yep, that's my car. And I'm going to try to see if I can find a picture of the townhomes, and then I'll go to some of the geothermal pictures. So there's groups of these townhomes that will also be converted as a part of the project. So these townhomes here, here, and then there's one up here, and then there's one in between these buildings. So there's 88 units in the first building, the one I'm standing on now, and then there's a total of about 325 additional affordable housing units that'll all be geothermal that are being converted, and we're in the design process of that currently. Let me show you some pictures of the work. So when we did the test bore, we found like an old buried foundation, and the site was kind of a nightmare in terms of on-site discoveries. And when you start with your test bore, that's where you start to understand what you're dealing with. So this is just some pictures from the test bore drilling. So we decided on doing we're going to do either 32 or 36 500-foot boreholes. The test bore and the refinement of the loads, we ended up going with 32 500-foot boreholes. One set of 16 boreholes went under this parking lot, and then there's another parking lot on the other side of the building where the other 16 went, and then they all go into a mechanical room, which I will show you. This is just loop stuff. And I'm happy to send people pictures, the links to any of these pictures. They are not proprietary. This is one of the parking lots that they are already backfilling, but you'll see that there's 4 boreholes here that make up a circuit, and this is a reverse return header that then comes down and will go back into the building. But this is just during construction. This is the other side of the building. This is just as they're unburying the boreholes that were under that parking lot. This is the parking lot where that first drilling was done, where you saw my car. So they basically peeled back the whole parking lot and then trenched in between for the reverse return headers. Everything comes back in. Claverack is the drilling company that won the bid and did the work. This is where all the boreholes come in. There's groups of 4 or 500s. So this is a circuit right here, and so this is the supply, and this is the return, and this is connected to 4 or 500-foot boreholes, and so is this, and so is that, and so is that, and these are this is where the driller's work ended. They valved off. And the interface on the inside of the building, you'll see down here, is a metal manifold, which is pretty common when the mechanical contractor picks it up at that stage because they're more comfortable with metal. A lot of times, if the geo contractor does the internal manifold, it'll end up being plastic. But so these are pre-made manifold headers that will eventually get put on there and suspended. This is just during the initial pressure testing. So this is a little further along in the process, and that's my partner Jeff, and this is before they insulated the pipes, but this shows you the headers ended up getting connected. So this is HDPE plastic pipe that's sealed with link seal coming in the building. You put on a flanged valve on there, and then you end up on a butterfly valve in this case, and then they attach the metal manifold. And so this is the supply and return header for the ground loop. There's 3 pumps that supply the ground loop and send the water to the main set of riser pumps. So it's a little more complicated than we probably have time to get into. And some of you know a lot about this, and some probably don't know much at all. But there's 3 pumps are pretty common for ground loops in larger systems, and also for building pumps. These are actually the building pumps, but they're identical. So there's 2 sets of pumps. There's a set of pumps that drives the ground loop and does it based on difference in temperature. And then there's 3 sets of pumps that send the water to all the heat pumps in the building, the 88 units and some common space and some domestic hot water. And so it's a decoupled system. They all share the same water, but one set of pumps just drives the ground loop, and the other set just sends it to the heat pumps. The reason we do that is because, especially on a building like this, where each heat pump is a little oversized, and they all need 3 GPM per ton of capacity. So you oftentimes have a higher flow rate need inside the building than the ground loop necessarily has to suffer through. So to avoid excessive pressure drop in the ground loop, you decouple them. So you just drive the ground loop as fast as you need to get the thermal energy in, but not necessarily if they're coupled completely, and the ground loops and drives water through the ground heat exchanger and through the building. you basically have to make sure that you can satisfy the 3 GPM per ton of your heat pumps, but that might be over pumping or excessive amounts of pumping energy for your ground loop. I'm not sure I explained that well. This is the domestic hot water system. It's 4 tanks that are fed by 2 CO2 refrigerant heat pumps. It's a little hard to tell what's going on. This is a 25-ton package CO2 refrigerant heat pump that basically sends hot water out to this heat exchanger, which then interfaces to send hot water to the tanks. And there's 2 of these. So basically you've got, and CO2 refrigerant is really great for domestic hot water, can make very hot water, and can deal with the high lift of a hot water system, meaning that you go from street temperature all the way up almost to domestic water temperature in one lift. That's what CO2 does best.
John, just a time check for you.
I'm good. I'm never short on things to talk about. So,
And that's what I count on, because it's always very interesting. Any last minute questions from anyone? Thank you very much, John. Really interesting.
yeah, glad to do it.
I don't see any hands, so I guess we'll wrap up and thank everyone for coming. The new folks, spread the word about our every other Friday meeting. And with that, I guess we'll begin our weekends, some of us.
Well, just real quick,
Oh.
as we were talking, I want to acknowledge that Naomi joined NY-GEO, so thank you.
Oh,
Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll see you next time we meet.
yeah. And we should talk about the economics of low income housing sometime, but that's another thing.
John, anytime you're welcome to come on.
Okay.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thanks,
Have a
everybody.
good weekend, everyone.
Thanks, you too.
Hey, thanks, John.